Welcome, everyone. Thanks for taking out time for the panel discussion here today. So today, we are discussing the ESG and the rise of responsible corporation. ESG would stand for environmental, social, and governance. Today, companies are expected to have a positive social impact to contribute towards an inclusive and sustainable growth, in addition to, of course, being financially profitable and successful. So we will discuss, the ESG reporting and how, Navita can start off by saying that how G sees, what is the role in playing, in reporting the ESG. If you could start.
Good evening, everybody. I know it's the last session, everybody is tired, right? The last thing that you really want to have is a boring session at this point in time. But when I would look at the role of General Counsel, it's not sticking to the responsibility that we have as lawyers to advise to our organizations. Actually, the role of a lawyer when it comes to ESG is so crucial that the lawyers now, the in-house counsels now need to understand what's the business. They need to partner with maybe the research and development team. The science is to be understood. The business processes need to be understood. The product needs to be understood. Packaging needs to be understood. Because if we really want to apply some advisory note and really need to support the businesses in evolving their business ESG strategies, their business conduct, the business processes, procedures, they really need to be there as a partner, through and through, across the board, the management, the business leaders, and multiple functional heads. So it's a wider role. It's a part of being that crucial think tank that you have in the organization. Does it stop at only advising? The only reason to understand is that we are going to advise? No. It's to help them even build that strategy, how they really need to think about E as an environment, S social, and G governance. Because any miss on any of these is really going to have very different kind of impact on the organization, from reputational loss to monetary losses, to loss of business, to loss of customers, the clients, the stakeholders. Because today when we talk about even hiring people, the first question we generally get from the new candidates is, how is the company focused on ESG? How are we looking at sustainability? How are we looking at giving back to the communities, to the environment, to the people around us? And what's the contribution of the organization? At least I get those questions when I'm hiring. So I'm assuming that most of us would be getting these kind of questions. In this new topic of ESG, we also see the race of everybody going out in the social media, in the public, trying to declare, make strong claims, very, very positive claims in terms of, here, this is what we are doing to help the environment go green, which may become a misstep and land into greenwashing. The role of general counsels is also to ensure that they are coaching and mentoring the boards in terms of what sort of claims are going to be staked in the public domain. Stay close to the facts. Do not go overboard. And I think my friends out here who are from public listed companies can add more to that, but I'm sure they can share what sort of responsibilities they shoulder in order to help the board stay in the right direction.
Thank you. Just to make a comment or interjection, I think Navita has kind of given you a holistic perspective. It's not the role of the general counsel that's changing. In fact, the role of all professionals are going to change. And that's because the very purpose of the corporation has actually changed. If you look at the purpose of the corporation for the last 100 years, all of us thought that our loyalty is to the shareholders. Whereas today, the whole of the corporates, whether it's in India or globally, we are talking about stakeholders. So there is a very, very fundamental shift in the way the purpose of corporation is being looked at. That's number one. Number two, for long, at least if not too long, at least for the last 10 years to 15 years, most of the corporations used to actually focus on quarterly numbers. We used to kind of start the life at a moment, end on a quarter. But today, people are actually talking about long-term creation value. And third, most of our actually disclosures that are coming out from public corporations in particular are no more compliance driven, but are more governance driven. So if you really look at these three parameters, the purpose, the longevity, and of course, the governance aspect over the technical compliance aspects, the entire gamut of corporation has changed, and hence, the role of the General Counsel obviously will change. The role of the General Counsel is now more strategic, more holistic. Obviously, you need to be aware of what's happening around you, not just in a particular area, but possibly all touch points that have an impact on the corporation, and advise the board appropriately.
PK, just to add, also one of the perspective we are seeing definitely, as you mentioned, all the professionals' roles evolving. From a general counsel standpoint, if you see, we all talk, from various, programs, sessions here. GC's expertise in governance, which you are there, understand risk better, understand business as well, and understands the various ESG-oriented laws as well. As you know, each of the components has a specific element of legal aspects are also involved. So from that standpoint, organizations are also looking when they're drawing up the ESG strategy or ESG program, they're looking for some good leaders who can integrate and be the champions. So here's a potential opportunity for the general counsels to raise to the level where they can integrate the ESG program as such or take lead. I've seen in some of the organizations wherein general counsels is actually leading the ESG program. They're part of the ESG board committees as well. Purely with respect to the business knowledge and the whole integration of GRC aspect and understanding contracts, risk, opportunities and all those aspects, I think there is an opportunity for the general counsels to take lead, raise the hand and take that as a leadership position as well. So just a thought, for all of us to see whether we want to, take that additional role and lead this initiative for the companies.
Amit, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I think, first of all, I think all my co-panelists have already covered it, but as PK has rightly said, I think the fundamental role of corporations have changed. I think we have moved to the world where only doing profits is not good enough. It is about what is the larger impact that you are creating. Stakeholders have become more important. People are asking you that while you are generating top line, what is the overall environment, social impact that as an organization you are creating. So that is becoming important. And this pressure is coming from all the quarters. So whether it is the millennial consumers, they want to consume products and be invested in the companies which are more responsible. Whether you look at the investors, they want to put their money where they see the longevity of the business. So being responsible and doing business responsibly has become synonym to longevity of the business. So I think that's a trend change that we have really seen. And I think in that context, therefore, this whole discussion on ESG, if you see as a country as well, we have moved from a world where it was first came CSR, then came BRR, and now we are talking of BRSR, right? And what seemed to be earlier as a point on only reporting is now becoming, what actually you are doing on the ground, and are you really creating an impact there or not, right? So it is becoming that important. Now coming to the role of GC, what GC can do, I think GC brings this very fine balance of understanding of business, right? Because we understand business well, and we also understand this stakeholder expectation quite well. We understand what regulators are expecting from us. We understand what our shareholders are expecting from us. So I think we can bring that fine balance on expectations when we are kind of putting it forward as a corporation. Whatever you are committing as a ESG targets, whether they are good enough and whether they are right thing to put in the public domain or not is a filter, I would say, as a GC you can definitely apply. You play a very important person as a challenger as well, right? Because if you see, and possibly we can talk about it, but today The integrity of data on ESG is not of the same standard as the financial data is, right? People write a lot of English over there, but there is no comparability, there is no standardized reporting mechanism. So I think that is another challenge where, particularly for listed company, when we are putting something out and you do multiple level of reportings, whether each report is talking the same language or not, or whether you are saying something different as a GC and someone who is supposed to be the beholder of the responsible business conduct has to do that filtration process, right? So you can do a lot of that awareness building, you can do a lot of that filtration process in the organization. Another important role I think that you can play as a GC is really helping shaping the regulation, because I believe that in our country even regulation is as of now at a nascent stage where we are talking about how do we bring one standardized reporting mechanism, right? And I talked about it. If you have to look at the balance sheets of few companies together and you want to compare their financial results, with some degree of certainty you can say that yes, these are comparable. But if I ask you to do the same thing for the ESG reporting, possibly that does not exist, because there is no common reporting format or parameters that are there. Now that requires whether it is company secretaries or it is general counsels, to work along with the regulators and bring a reporting framework, one, which is simple, which can be easily understandable by the stakeholders, and two, it is comparable. It brings some degree of standardization so that we can hold people accountable to what they have committed. So I think clearly there is a role for general counsels to play in this area, and we can, as I said, I think that we bring that fine balance of understanding internal business and understanding external stakeholders quite well. And I think, in shaping up the regulation in this field through advocacy, GCs can play a larger role.
Okay. Shweta, could you highlight the risks involved in the ESG reporting?
Amit covered it to some bit, that firstly, there are no standards of reporting, and there are different connotations. So the way you're reading the 17 UN SDGs internally as an organization also, and walking away from your understanding of the COP26 and 27, as you break down whatever requirements apply to your individual business unit and how do you map it to the buzzword sustainable business strategy, is a fair bit of struggle for businesses. It's a newer concept. While one has been doing environmental, social, and governance-related compliances internally, and has been following what is happening externally also, and has been part of several internal and external audits. As an organization, it's still a struggle to understand how do you map your internal strategy, break it down, and map it to the 17 UN SDGs. That's one. The second thing is that org-wide awareness is still very low. So while as a business, outwardly you can state that you are following or adopting a sustainable business strategy, and that's at the core of whatever you do, to have that same level of understanding percolate to those individual business units within your organization is quite a task. Obviously, it gets more complicated as we go by, because there is a fair amount of scrutiny in the public also when it comes to products and services as to how green or environmentally conscious are your products and services, and consumer behavior depends on that. So also ensuring that what you're putting out there can be scrutinized in a fashion that it links back beautifully to your product and does not damage your reputation in any way. Investor behavior, again, is something that you need to watch out for. So all of these, I believe, are intrinsically linked. And then you bring it back to the point, Monica, where you're talking about a plethora of regulatory, statutory compliances that you're responsible for. Again, auditors that you're answerable to, sensitizing your internal employees. So there are a whole bunch of things that one has to consider, and they time and again become a risk for the enterprise depending upon what is it that one is willing to put out there. So quite a complex web, I would say, is what ESG is at the moment.
So the companies are feeling a lot of pressure, social and environmental pressure.
Well,
And why
I don't think,
is it now?
I don't think it's a pressure, honestly. Like, okay, I may be fortunate to work with the companies where it was never a pressure. For the reason why these companies have always believed in doing business in the right way. And ESG is nothing new. As I said, it is all about doing the business responsibly, right? So it was always, if you are always responsible about your stakeholders and your decision making, you were conscious of what will be the impact of your decisions, not only on your top line, but across the value system that you are touching, then you are always following the principles of ESG. It has now possibly become articulated in a certain way, but if you are doing business, what we call it in Marico as conscious capitalism, it was, if you are always conscious and you always believed that the company doesn't belong only to me, but to belong to a larger set of stakeholders, then there was never a pressure. And I think some of these things have been built into the fabric of the company. And that's my advice when I see the companies who have really done it successfully are the one who have not kept ESG as one function, good to do kind of a thing handled by few people, but really build it in the fabric of the company where each and everything, right, from a product conceptualization, selection of the third parties, innovation that you are doing, and what products you are going to come in. When you start applying that filter of impact of your each business decision into larger ecosystem, you automatically become responsible business. And once you do that, then all of this became so integral to your business that it's difficult to then remove it. So then there is no pressure because it is business as usual. So, honestly, I would say, it was not that difficult. What is difficult today possibly is a standardized reporting mechanism and getting information from different parts of the business to report in the format which is right in all respects.
Okay. KB, will ESG compliance help Indian companies play a more prominent role in global supply chains?
Yes, it will, because if you take companies like Tata Steel, we are in a sector which is hard to abate. If you see globally, the steel industry contributes to about 8% of the carbon emissions. So if you are in an industry like this, it's not only important that you have the regulatory licenses to kind of operate, but you in fact need the social license to operate. And that's where if you see institutions like Tata Steel, which has been there for 100 plus years, we've won kind of the community trust. There is enormous confidence and trust that the public reposes on institutions like this, because aspects of sustainability, aspects of CSR have actually long outlived even before the legislations actually have come in. The legislations that actually come in now, if you look at the CSR, it's coming in 2013. If you look at most of the ESG reporting that's coming in, it's actually coming in from 2019, 2020, 21, and 22. Whereas for institutions like Tata's, it's been for century we've been practicing, and I think that's become a part of a DNA, and hence you start reaping rich benefits because the community and the other stakeholders do trust you. So there is, instead of looking at it as an impediment to your business, it's actually an opportunity, and also it's also an opportunity to kind of show that you are a very good corporate citizen. You not just create wealth in terms of profits, but you also create wealth in non-financial terms, whether it's in terms of community development, whether it's in terms of employment, whether it's in terms of, kind of bringing up the rural to a certain standard, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it's a great opportunity for all corporates, and I think for all professionals to kind of be invested in this, because at the end of the day, sustainability matters for the longevity of the institution.
Navita, what is the target's approach to ESG?
I'm just going to steal one statement of Amit. I'm fortunate to work with an organization that is very proactive. And to his point, there is no pressure. We also don't have any pressure. Honestly, Target is keeping a holistic view in terms of how are they going to have their business strategies. And one of the key things that they're doing is that they have in the board and in the business an entrenchment of ESG strategy built in. So all the goals of the organization are actually having an intrinsic part of ESG built in. Whether we are looking at reduction of emissions. We are keeping ourselves within the limits to make sure that we are not exceeding that 1.5 degrees of, temperature, which is going to be impacted. We are making sure that the emissions are reduced. And what are we doing is that we are buying more and more renewable energy. And in fact, our target was until 2030 to achieve about 50%. Our last year's report itself is showing 34% plus. So we are already fast achieving our goals, which would be done way before the targets have been set for us. We are working with our partners to help eliminate the waste to the extent possible. We are trying to build the packaging materials where we are not impacting the environment with the plastic wastage. But we are not just giving the targets to our partners, we are working along with them to make sure that these are reduced and these are worked together. We have our own brands, which are maybe close to 45 plus private labels that Target owns itself. And they're making sure that about maybe in another decade or so, 100% of their own brands should have net zero emission. So Target's approach is keeping the business in focus, but the positive impact of this business on both people and planet. So the focus is on environment, elimination of waste, bringing the stakeholders and partners along, even something as simple as apparel, which is supposed to be one of the most wasted product, frankly speaking. They are really wanting to now build a sustainable product where it can be recycled, it can be regenerative. And their focus is on all such products where there can be as lesser wastage as possible.
Okay.
So Target's approach is pretty holistic on multiple fronts.
Shweta, can you tell us the Mercedes-Benz plan, 10-year, what is your intent to reduce carbon emissions per vehicle?
So Mercedes-Benz Worldwide is one of the founding members of Transform to Net Zero. And we have something called Ambition 2039 that we are firmly committed to, where by 2039, all our vehicles would be electric and fully connected.
Okay.
So we are one of the few German automakers and the foremost German automakers who've signed up to the declaration of zero emissions cars and vans in COP26. And we are hopeful that by 2030, 50% of our passenger vehicles that we put on roads are going to be plug-in hybrids or electric. And there's an investment of 60 billion euros that we are putting forward by just 2026. Okay. So there are a lot of commitments internally, and they're all very well aligned to the climate action goals. Mm-hmm. Recently, we organized our first sustainability dialogue in India, impressing upon the criticality of the region in the ESG compliance for the group. It saw about 450 people physically being there at Sundar Nursery in New Delhi. And we work with some of the young entrepreneurs, apps such as School the Globe, etc., where we are at the forefront of that technology revolution, where we are hoping that through technology, we will be able to really contribute to the worldwide climate action goals that we are hoping to contribute towards. Mercedes-Benz Research and Development is MB's largest automotive R&D outside of the Europe, and our focus is on the electric architecture from here and making our products greener. So all the 40,000 odd direct suppliers or the 1 lakh indirect suppliers that we work with today are pledging to contribute to Ambition 2039 and are major partners in this journey. We hear a lot about ESG these days, but like my fellow panelists have been talking about, it being at the core of what they do, and it's not a new concept. It's just that today we need to break it down and make it more wholesome, holistic in everyday business conversations. And the way we kind of tie the product to ESG is become very critical, because it's no longer one of those voluntary compliances or actions that companies would back in the day commit themselves to. Today, it's pretty much involuntary because everybody is talking about it, and consumers are taking note of your products in that way. So, yes, firmly committed as a brand to net zero, and 2039 is the deadline that we've given to ourselves, which is 11 years ahead of the EU deadline.
Okay, so you're ahead of your competitors.
11 years ahead of the EU deadline.
Okay, okay. Mr. Bhasin, I wanted to talk to you about the Marico of FMCG companies. Now they are acquiring sustainable firms, mostly startups. HUL has recently acquired Wellbeing Nutrition and all. So when you look for a M&A deal, I mean, do you look for the sustainability factor there? How do you go about it?
Okay, so I think we had this full panel on M&A just before this. I will answer this in two parts. I think, first of all, for any merger or acquisition or any corporate action to make sense, right, it should have the business logic to it, right? It should either be adding to my portfolio, or it should be fulfilling a portfolio gap, or it should be helping me expand to a category where I feel a growth, or adjacent to my overall business objective. So I think the first principle of doing M&A is that it should make business logic to it, right? Having said that, whether ESG is a important aspect to consider, the answer is yes, of course. And it can happen in two ways. You have went ahead and made public disclosures about your own ESG commitments. You definitely don't want to acquire a target where either the product line that the target is in is going to dilute your position, or is it contradictory to what position you have taken in the public domain, or they are either into practices which are not lined in your ESG practices, or there are any history which can dilute your position as a corporate. So whether one should look at the ESG aspects of a target, the answer is yes. As the previous panel we were talking of due diligence, the due diligence is done on the financial aspects, legal aspects, they are also done on the ethical aspects, whether the company had any history of bribery, corruption. Likewise, now there are DD that is being conducted on the ESG aspects as well. That what will be the impact of this particular target on my overall ESG position, right? Whether it will dilute it in any way, if at all there are any gross negatives, what will it take to correct that, right? So all of that happens, whether it is at the due diligence stage or at the agreement stage. You want to build in clauses which helps you protect your position under the ESG, or even at the integration level, where you want to bring the practices, uses of raw material or processes in line with what you expect that company to be. So yeah, ESG is becoming an important consideration, but I would still go back to my initial point saying that the fundamental reason why any company acquires another corporate is for the business reason, and it should make first business sense for sure. All these things are then checklist that you will definitely check to verify whether it is a right target for me to invest in or not. Yeah, does it answer your question?
Yeah.
Yep.
Sujat, can you, Re-Sustainability Limited, you help the companies with making the ESG reporting. What are some specific environmental aspects which are a part of ESG? Can you throw some light around
Sure.
that?
I think first I'll talk about the E of ESG a little bit more, and then I'll talk about how we also help the other companies to help achieve their E goal of the ESG. Yeah, I'm sure a lot of our panelists talked about various aspects, whether it is with respect to consumption of natural resources, usage of water, drawing the groundwater, waste management practices, hazardous waste, biomedical waste, or electronic waste. how exactly the waste management is, being done in the organization, whether there are proper recycling, reuse, reclaim, processes are already built in, alternate fuels, which you're talking about, clean energy related aspects. I think these are all various aspects, more importantly, the effluents and emissions. So if you see the BRSR report, Principle 1 and 2, I think specifically talks about a lot of detail about all these aspects of the environmental parameters which can impact the society. So I think all these are the, one of the fundamental elements which goes into the reporting, including scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 emissions. Now coming to the second part as to what we specifically do with respect to some of the environmental services. Firstly, pretty much the municipal corporations in India are our clients, including Bombay. The Deonar dump site, I'm sure you are all aware of it, right? So we'll soon see a waste to energy plant. The entire, the facility will be converted into a waste to energy plant very soon. We already have similar such plants in Hyderabad, Delhi. So you actually can generate power from the waste. Not only that, we can also convert the waste to compost and also compressed biogas as well. And the same can be used for running the vehicles as well. We are actually running our vehicles through CBG. So that's from a municipal solid waste which we all generate at all our homes. With respect to the industrial waste, processing the hazardous waste and trying to make it as an alternate fuel for the cement industries. We all know the famous Twin Towers in Noida, right? So the whole construction and demolition waste can actually be used for paver blocks, tiles, aggregates. We all know the sand problems, the mining issues. So that can be one solution. Similarly, the end of life vehicle, scrap policy. We are setting up an end of life vehicle, facility which will recycle all the scrapped vehicles. You can see the government has recently passed notification. Very soon, even possibly private vehicles also will come into that, and you can possibly see a lot of old vehicles which will be scrapped, and whether it is metal, plastic, rubber, all of glasses, all can be recycled. And lastly, with respect to the electronic waste, we all have a lot of electronic waste at our homes. So we have set up a first such plant which will reclaim precious metals like gold, silver from the electronic waste. So these are some of the areas which we are trying to work with the corporates, work with the municipal corporations. So there is no such thing like waste. I think the word is purely resource management and resource efficiency. I think if companies, corporations follow some of these practices like alternate fuels and recycling, reclaiming, I think that would really help the overall ESG score of the company to a pretty high level.
Before we conclude, there are just few touch points. KP, could you tell us about, how ESG differs from CSR rules?
Okay, so obviously the CSR is part of the overall ESG, kind of strategy, because CSR is probably a subset or an area that a company works, but ESG is far more macro because you not only are looking at your corporate social responsibility, but you're also embedding sustainability into your business practices. So the way you think about ESG is you actually practice, you live ESG within the organization and then go ahead and report. Reporting is only an outcome of what you are actually doing. Whereas in CSR, most often what you can actually do is you can even outsource. I mean, if you really don't have a CSR wing, you can actually fund the 2% of net profit that you're supposed to expend to either a Prime Minister's Relief Fund or to another foundation and just make a disclosure. But when it comes to ESG, I don't think there's anything called outsourcing. You either practice it, you kind of embed it into the business practice and then derive the benefit, or you kind of just perish. So I think ESG is a far more greater concept than CSR.
So ESG regulations, global and India, they are different
I'll
regulations.
possibly try some light on that.
Okay.
With respect to the regulatory framework, just take a minute. I think European Union is definitely doing good because there are some mandatory, reporting which is already there. I think even in US, I think SEC is trying to come up with a specific regulation. I'm sure, a lot of other geographies as well are coming up with a mandatory. I think initially it's all started as voluntary, like PK did mention. Some of the companies were doing from ages, but European Union, UK, US, and I think Singapore, they're all coming up with a mandatory regulation. Same thing with India as well. As we speak, I think from next financial year, I think top 1,000 companies, listed companies, are required to mandatorily publish the BRSR report. So we talked about the standards. So I think, of course, one of the aspects which is there is that every company is following different standards. The GRI, SASB, TCFD, CDP. There are standards. Companies are choosing, based on their industry, the relevant standard. But I think there is a initiation going on with respect to having a integration. So there is a initiative going on to have a international standards which will help all the companies compare. But with respect to the India, I think BRSR, they specifically did mention if the companies are already following any of those standards, they just need to do a cross-reference in the BRSR report. One last update with respect to the Indian regulatory framework. I think there is a recent consultation paper issued by SEBI. So now they're toying the concept of the assurance as well. We talked about greenwashing, because once you put it mandatory, so they all try to generate the data and also in terms of accuracy and integrity of data. So there is a proposal in the consultation paper wherein they may want to make, the assurance of that particular ESG reporting also as a mandatory to start with 250 companies and 500 and so on and so forth. That is something what we'll have to see. But regulatory framework in India is also evolving, quite in an aggressive manner. Yeah.
Just to add this, Monica, I think where the convergence will happen is on the financials, you got the IFRS. The IFRS Foundation clearly has given out guidance, and most countries and most global corporations obviously have, kind of aligned themselves to the IFRS. Of course, India is also in some sense aligned to the IFRS on the financials, except that you've slightly tweaked and you call it Ind AS. So clearly on the financials, IFRS, and IFRS has now set up the IFRS Sustainability Board, which again has published already 2 standards, one on general sustainability, disclosures, and the other is on climate change risk. So these 2 standards have already been published. It's up for public comments. And I think the IFRS standards are actually going to converge all of the other standards, and that, I think, will become the norm as we go into the future.
Okay, any concluding remarks by the panelists? I mean, we are concluding the session. Amit?
Sure, I think, we have touched all the points of ESG. I would just say that it has to become the way of life for the corporation. You don't have a option on this. You have to, the companies of tomorrow will be the companies which will conduct their businesses responsibly, and those are the companies which will win. I think there's a larger responsibilities on corporation which has to travel beyond their own compliance, and that's where, I think you talked about scope 2, scope 3, which is all about your third parties. And what is that all about? Conceptually, you see, they are saying that you are such a big company, you are working with so many third parties. If you start influencing the behavior and requesting some of these things, then it will happen in the larger ecosystem. So I think the responsibility of all the corporates who are sitting here in this room and on this dais, and all of us who are there is to really influence that larger ecosystem and start demanding some of these things, then only the larger impact will happen.
Shweta, Navita, anything you have to say?
Interesting discussion even in the panel, some good takeaways even as a general council that we are all united in our thinking, the way we are approaching the topic. And while we belong to organizations that have been working in this area for the longest time, now it's our chance to really bring all these moving pieces together. And like Shujat and I were just chatting on the site a little while back, where you have to look at all scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3, and your strategy in managing these 3 different scopes is really going to define the future of your business. And they're all very distinctive from one another. So yes, the road ahead is a complicated one as you bring the moving pieces together, but nonetheless a very integral one, because India used to commit to 2070 in carbon neutrality, and it's been advanced to 2030 by the Prime Minister saying at least get to greener fuel and electric vehicles and break it down. because of the importance of the topic. So certainly some really good points from fellow panelists. And yeah, those are my thoughts.
Navita?
I think my co-panelists have said it all. And the only thing probably I would say is what we've concluded is the responsibility that the country has taken probably in COP26 or 27 is actually going to rest with this private sector and to the corporate world. It's up to us. Each one of us would be required to be responsible, and every organization will have to contribute to the community, to the stakeholders, to the society, and also definitely to the clients and customers, beyond just thinking about the profit.
So I think it was a great session. Thank you everyone for coming. Thanks.